for the SABR Spoken Histories Oral Histories project. I am very excited to have David Letterman's kind of player and 1985 World Series hero, uh, shortstop Buddy Biancalana on what is this? It's about 2 o'clock in the afternoon on December 9th, 2025. Buddy, thank you for talking to me.
My pleasure, Jake. Thanks for having me, and you did a great job with the written history or the story about my background. So nice going.
Thank you. So, well, I'm going to pretend like I didn't write that and I don't know anything about it because I'm going to just ask you some questions that I may already know the answers to, but we want to get them on the record. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about what it was like growing up in Marin County and how you got into what family life was like and how you wound up getting into baseball as a fan and as a player.
Sure. Growing up in Marin County it was great. It was a great place to be. You know, California is a beautiful state, and we lived in an area called Greenbrae, just off of 101, not too far from the San Quentin prison. But it's a good area. You say prison, people say, "Oh my God, you live near a prison." It's good. It's a nice area. The prison's right on the bay, but yeah, it was great. I had a father who worked in the stock and bond business, and on the West Coast, the market closes at 1:30, so he was able to get home fairly early, and loved baseball, and was able to spend a lot of time with me, in the front yard playing, down at the local school where I attended. He was a wonderful father, and as long as they asked him to go play, he was willing to do it. And so we spent a lot of time in the front yard, and I had a retaining wall that I would throw a semi ball, rubber ball against it every day. I might spend an hour out there. And I like to say, I had to sidestep steps and pillars and planter boxes to make plays, and really was beneficial in helping with my footwork, I think. So, broke a lot of windows in the front yard. I think our homeowners insurance dropped us as a story because of all the broken windows from baseballs going through windows. But anyway, it worked. My parents sacrificed a homeowner's policy for me getting to the big leagues. So I'm grateful.
So growing up right across the bay from Candlestick Park, how often did you go to major league games? I guess also, did you go to Oakland games too, or?
Yeah, with my father growing up, we went to a lot of Giants games. I probably once a homestand, probably went to games, I would think. And then as I got older in high school and was able to drive, me and my friends would often go to the A's games at the Oakland Coliseum, which were fun as well. But I was a Giants fan up until I was 9 years old because my father was mentoring Bill Singer, who was the pitcher for the Dodgers. And so there are not many Giants fans who become Dodger fans, but I was one of them. And I became a Dodger fan for several years. And really, not just because of Bill Singer, I really fell in love with Vince Scully. I'd listen to games on my transistor radio under my pillow at night. And on games that Bill Singer was pitching that I really wanted to listen to, the reception in San Francisco or Marin County wasn't that great. The station in LA that was broadcasting the games was KFI 610. And so the reception was kind of sketchy. So I would oftentimes climb up on my roof and just go listen to the game when he was pitching. But just, great memories as a young baseball fan.
Other than Singer, who were some of your other favorite players when you were a kid? And was there anybody that you tried to emulate their style or anybody that steered you toward being a shortstop or?
No, there really wasn't. Watching Chris Spire play for the Giants, was inspiring to me. But watching Willie Mays play was, he was so exciting. He was such a presence on the field with everything he did. Whether he was hitting or playing center field or running the bases, he was, really exciting to watch. Willie McCovey because he was this big left-handed bat, with a really cool swing. Juan Marichal because of the big leg kick was exciting to watch for me. And as far as the Dodgers, go. I used to love the three dog, Willie Davis, number 3 in center field. Was always, fun to watch. And Jimmy Wynn, when he was playing for the Dodgers as well. So, a lot of great memories with the game. And, the A's, I went to the World Series. They were in the World Series 3 years in a row against the let's see, in the order of, I think they were the Reds, the Mets, and then the Dodgers, or Reds, Dodgers, Mets in that order. But went to all 3 of those World Series. I think I went to whatever, 10 to 12 games, so that was really, really fun. And, watching guys like Reggie Jackson play over there and then playing against Reggie. Um, and the Sal Bando and all those guys, Ken Holtzman, Catfish Hunter, Vida Blue, who I later played with myself. But yeah, a lot of good times as a baseball fan.
And so when you got into baseball yourself, about what at what age did you start Little League or
Well, I was a bat boy at 8 years old, then started playing at 9 years old in the minor leagues over in the Kentfield Greenbrae Little League,
okay.
and then played in the major leagues from 10 to 12. My dad coached along with some other great people, Harry Del Grande, Doug Connor. We just had some really great families in our neighborhood and in the county in Greenbrae where we grew up. And men who really just, really tried to bring out the best in their kids and paid a lot of attention to us. So it was really fun memories. Playing Little League and then on to Babe Ruth and then on to Redwood High School. Which was really great playing at Redwood. I don't know if I'm skipping too far ahead here, but no.
Well, I was gonna introduce the talk a little bit about Redwood, and the fact like Al Andrus and what outside Marin County. I don't know how many people know who Al Andrus is. So, but when Al Andrus first saw you playing in Babe Ruth, he said that kid's going to go to Redwood and he's going to be the best shortstop in Redwood history. So, what does that mean? What is the impact of Al Andrus saying that about you? Like, explain a little bit.
Well, I heard he said that. I was told that story. At the time, I wasn't aware of it. I loved playing baseball. I was just playing for the fun of it, and I knew I was pretty decent at it. But Al Endress was the coach at Redwood for many years, and played 2 professional sports. He played a short time in the NFL for the 49ers as a running back, and then in Calgary, I think for the Stampeders as a running back in the Canadian Football League, and also played in the Dodgers minor league system. So he was, and being in the Dodgers system, he was very well versed in, the fundamentals of the game, and he was just a great teacher and really prepared me to play, at the professional level. But it was a really great program. Growing up as a kid, I would go to their games, and it was really something. The uniforms were beautiful uniforms. Guys had short hair, well groomed, and really played the game, in my opinion, the way it was supposed to be played. Played hard, and Al had a real presence about him. Was a real leader, a real disciplinarian, and really made his players believe they were better than what they were. We were pretty good. We had a lot of really good players. A lot of guys went on to play professional ball and collegiate ball. But one of his real gifts was to get us to believe that we were better than what we really were. And he just had a great reputation in the baseball world, and his word was gold to scouts and universities, coaches. I like to tell the story. He got me a full ride to University of Texas without Texas ever seeing me play. Cliff Gustafson was the coach there. But I got ahead and signed at Arizona State. But my junior year, we were mythical national champions. We were voted by a magazine. I don't know if it was Sporting News or Easton. I'm not sure.
It was Easton Baseball Bats.
Yeah.
Did it, and I don't know where it was published, but yeah.
Yeah, so we were voted mythical national champions. Then I think we were runner up my senior year. So it was really a really great high school experience of playing baseball at Redwood and playing for Al Endress. And when I was drafted by the Royals, I once I reported to rookie ball, I was playing with a lot of college players who were coming from, big baseball schools. And, I realized that I was further ahead of them fundamentally, all because of the coaching of Al Lindros that I had in high school.
And that team, so you mentioned the mythical national championships, and you were winning the conference championships. I think it was 10 out of 12 years he won, and you were like right in the middle of that span. So um at the time, did you guys understand what it meant to be that good, or is it more like there's sort of that, does a fish know that it's wet, or is it just when you're in that environment, do you have a concept of how good you are or how much better you are than how other teams have it?
Yeah, I think we did. When we would get on the field, because of how we dressed, the uniforms and the short hair, and his and Al's presence, Al Anderson's presence. And when we took infield, we had a two-ball infield. We had two balls going the whole time we were taking infield. And you could see these other teams were like, whoa, look at these guys. So yeah, we knew we were good. And again, he made us believe we were even better than what we were. So um, yeah, we knew we were pretty special.
Well, and he even made a point of making sure, because you were kind of a magnet school and the baseball talent would go there, you weren't going to get a lot of competition in your area. So you traveled a lot. What was the experience like traveling around at that
Yeah,
age?
back in those days, teams really didn't travel much, but he would have us, going down to San Diego. I think we made trips to San Diego twice, and then we'd play in a tournament down in San Luis Obispo, and that was kind of a big deal in those days. Now it's not that
Yeah.
big of a deal, right? But for then, it was really really fun, and to be able to play against um, you know teams outside of our area, right? You just don't know, right? You don't know what you don't know, and you start to see other teams play down in big and down in Southern California, and where it's a great baseball market, and it's just kind of see how we matched up against those teams. We matched up really really well. Um, so those are really great experiences for me. There's good memories, really great memories of playing in San Luis Obispo, playing in San Diego, playing against Alan Trammell when I was a sophomore in high school and he was a senior, and then we both went on to play against each other in the '84 playoffs, and now he's in the Hall of Fame.
And you played against the team from Taiwan too. That
Yeah,
you,
what an amazing experience that was. That was my let's see, I think that was my junior year,
yeah.
where there was a team that Taiwan national team, as I guess they were, that came over and played teams. I think they even played some collegiate teams around the U.S. and they played us. It was an amazing day. Now again, there's some international competition, but back in those days, it was unheard of. And but it was we probably had 2 or 3 thousand people at our high school field, and it was packed to see this team from Taiwan playing us, and they had a really great pitcher who, to this day, I say threw as hard as anybody ever faced. Um, and we lost in extra innings. They were willing to. It was tied 1-1, I believe, after regulation, after 7 innings, and I guess what in Taiwan, I guess they were willing to have the game end in a tie, and Ender said, no, 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 we're not. We play in extra innings, and it just so happened that we lost on a wild pitch or a pass ball. Yeah.
So yeah, that was your junior year, which was also the mythical national championship. And part of what was a big deal there was you had a lot of seniors in the lineup. You were one of the few juniors. And so because coaches and scouts were coming to see the seniors, they saw you. What was that like when you first started realizing like major league scouts were paying attention to you?
Yeah, I think, it was my sophomore year, and I think we were playing in South San Francisco. And after the game, a scout came up to me, and they used to hand out these little information cards, right?
Yeah.
I think I want to believe it was a Met scout. And he gave me this card, and he said, "We fill this out and send it to me." So I did. And that was kind of the first time I was like, "Oh, okay, that's interesting." And then I got asked to play in a winter league. They had these scout teams in the Bay Area then, and the Dodgers had a scout team, and they asked me to play on their scout team. I think I did that for two different winters. In fact, Dave Stewart, we talked about at the outset of this conversation. I don't know if it was recorded or not, but we uh, we talked about Dave Stewart. Dave Stewart was on our team, and there was Dave Steve was on it in the league, and Dave Righetti was in the league. There's pretty good players, that were still playing high school ball. Actually, some of them had already signed professional contracts that just came and wanted to get a few, at bats or innings pitched and, during the winter. But that was a great experience for me. I want to say I was a sophomore at the time, playing against guys like that, and Lloyd Mosby was in that league as well. And so that was a really great experience for me to play against guys that were already playing professional ball, and I was just a sophomore in high school. So, and I, held my own. So it was fun.
So did you talk to other well, before we get into getting drafted, you had a lot of colleges. You mentioned the Texas offer and you signed with ASU, but what other were you considering any other schools, and what was it about ASU that made you decide?
Well, yeah,
And we'll clarify Arizona State University
there you
just
go.
for the
I think you
sake.
went there, right? Didn't you go
I
there?
did, yeah.
Yeah.
I went back I went there twice. I got a master's and a bachelor's. I didn't learn my lesson the first time.
Oh, good for you, man. That's great. Yeah, I fell in love when I went to Arizona State. I just kind of fell in love with everything about it. It was just a real baseball powerhouse in those days. I think they'd won, I don't know, one, maybe two national championships prior to that. And, Bob Horner was there and Hubie Brooks. And I just fell in love with the area. Um, and it was just kind of the place I felt like I wanted to go. The fact that I didn't hit much, I might have ended up on the bench, but I don't know. But I considered University of California, Bob Milano, the coach there, I really liked a lot. University of Arizona, Jerry Kindle was a coach there. In fact, I first visited University of Arizona, and then Jerry Kindle drove me halfway down I-10 to Phoenix, where Jim Brock picked me up halfway. So I guess they had a good enough relationship to where they wouldn't mind doing that. So, but they were, as you know, those two schools competed heavily in baseball in those days.
So when you committed to ASU, it kind of hurt your draft chances, at least out of high school, because I guess teams understood that your family really wanted you to get the education, and so they didn't expect you to sign. Do you know, were there any other teams that had before the Royals talked to you? Were there other teams that were looking at you and then decided to pass because they thought you wouldn't sign with them?
Yeah, I don't know if anybody actually passed because they didn't think I'd sign with them. But I thought the Reds or Pirates were going to take me, is what I'd heard. I hadn't heard anything from the Royals until the morning of the draft, which was kind of a funny story, which we can get into. But yeah, I don't know if anybody backed off because I signed with Arizona State. I think had I signed with a Stanford, maybe, that might have been a different story, or maybe even a Cal. Nothing against the ASU education there, but that's Stanford. Stanford was Stanford in those days, right? And Cal was Cal. But yeah, I just don't know if anyone backed off for that reason. But funny story. The morning of the draft, again, I hadn't heard from the Royals, and I was upstairs in my room, and we got the phone rang, and I picked it up, and my mother had picked up the phone the same time down in the kitchen, and it was John Sherholtz, who at the time was the scouting director for the Royals, and he said, "Buddy, it's John Sherholtz of the Royals, and we're getting ready to go into the draft, and if you're available at number 25, we're planning on taking you. We just want to, make sure that you're interested in signing." And my mom said, "No, he's going to college." And I said, "Mom, hang up the phone." And I said, "I got it." And so I said, "Yeah, John, yeah, if all things are right, I'd definitely be interested in signing." And so that's what happened. And that's how it all, how that's how it evolved. And I was blown away that I was a first round pick. I had no idea that I was going to go in the first round. But I had a Cal Ripken who was also a shortstop that year and went in the second round. So it's kind of one of my claim to fame.
That so yeah, so you got drafted, but then it took there was about a month of back and forth negotiation before you actually signed. And you signed right after they came and the Royals were playing the A's and invited you over to take practice with them. What's that experience like as a teenager, fresh out of high school to go out and have I think what Whitey Herzog was the manager at that time, right? So
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was a Sunday afternoon, Sunday morning, where drove 40 minutes over to the Oakland Coliseum and they gave me a uniform to put on and went out and took some batting practice and some ground balls. Charlie Lau was the hitting coach, and he kind of watched me hit and said a few things to me. And Clint Hurdle was I don't know if he was a rookie believe he was a rookie, but he gave me a nice, beautiful pair of patent leather spikes. Um, so it was really a neat experience to do that. I was 18 years old. Um, and and then I guess it was after that I signed,
yeah.
yeah, I think it was after that I signed and reported down to Sarasota, Florida. And it's very interesting. I think I weighed 148 pounds at the time, 5'10", 148 pounds. And, I think, anytime that, quote, the number one pick, was coming into camp, everybody's kind of curious as to, what's this guy look like? And when they saw me at 140 pounds, they said, wait a second, this guy's the number one pick. Um, but yeah, that's how it all started. That was the beginning of my professional career.
And so you played that couple months of rookie ball. Um, the next year, you were in single A. Um, what memories do you have of that was still oh, I lost my notes here. I think that was still in Sarasota, right?
Fort Myers was our
Fort
Florida
Myers,
State
right.
League team.
It
Yeah,
was still
yeah,
in Florida. I knew that much.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Yeah. So my first year of A ball was, I struggled, offensively, and even my second year, I struggled offensively, and even I gave up switch hitting. I was switch hitting and struggling, and decided just to go to the right side, and that didn't work, and went back to the left side, and just kind of fought my way through. But I was, I was challenged, Then I got to double A, and my bat started to show a little life. I started to kind of figure a few things out offensively. Um, Had a tough year defensively in Jacksonville. I made 48 errors. Um, I was not good, and we played on a bad field. The combination of that and a sports writer who liked to get on number one picks kind of was tough on me, Greg Larson. So it was a very tough year for me. But I hit enough to where the following spring training went in and had a pretty good spring training, and they took a chance and sent me to AAA, and that's where I really started to play much better. In fact, I won a Silver Glove. I think I had 17 or 18 errors that year, down from 48, and I can't remember what I hit, but hit better, 245 or 250, whatever it was. Started to show a little more life with the bat, and then got called up to the big leagues in September that year, and that was my first taste of the big leagues.
So your first spring training, what let's backtrack a little bit and then I want to get to you being called up. But when you were in your first spring training, what's that experience like? And I know you learned a few things from Frank White, but like what was the whole just showing up to camp and
Well, I'll backtrack a little bit more so than
yeah.
probably what you thought, but because it was in my contract to go to Major League Spring Training when I was, when I signed. So I was 19 and went to Major League Camp. And Freddie Patek, who was a shortstop at the time, had gotten hurt. Um, and so Whitey Herzog started playing me quite a bit. And, from what I was told, that they even considered, making me the shortstop at that time at 19. Um, but thought better of it, I guess. And so, but moving on, my first Major League Spring Training where I was on the Major League roster was after my double A year when I made 48 errors. And I did watch Frank White, catching ground balls. And I saw how he's really going and getting balls really out in front, turning the in-between hop into a short hop, which is really key for an infielder. And at the time, I might try and catch that ball coming into me as opposed to going out and getting the short hop. And so I started doing that, and it made a huge difference in my defense. to the point where I won a Silver Glove as the top shortstop in the minor leagues that year. Um, so Frank was very, just watching Frank was very instrumental in my improving defensively.
And then, like you said, at the end of the year, you were September call up. You got in 3 games, two just as a defensive replacement. Although one, you made an out that got Dan Quisenberry an important save. But then you finally got into the lineup. I forget if it was the final game of the season or the
Yeah.
second to last game of the season. Um, so yeah, when you well, I guess actually let's talk about at what point did you feel like you were ready to go to the majors when you're in Omaha, and how long is the wait between when you think you're ready and when the team actually brings you up?
Yeah, good question. I think I was playing really well. I was really catching the ball well, night in, night out. And I want to say I made about 17 errors, and I don't think I made one throwing error all year. I think I, played the whole season without making one throwing error. So I was really doing things well, and had a manager, Joe Sparks, that was really in my corner. And I probably, I could start to feel it. I could, I'd go to bed at night like thinking, okay, I see myself, walking through the doors at the time Royal Stadium, now Kauffman Stadium. So I started to naturally visualize, myself being there. It wasn't anything I intended to do. It was just starting to really kind of be part of me almost. And so I could really feel it happening. And I knew that I was, you know, pretty ready to do it. I was hitting pretty well at AAA. And then when you get to the big leagues, it can actually be a little bit easier to hit because guys are around the plate more. So there's not the temptation to chase as much. So yeah, that's about when I realized it. And then it was the September call up. I think we got in the playoffs that year, and I think I have to go back and check. But the September call up, getting called into Joe Sparks' office. I mean, told you're going to the big leagues was just amazing. And coming upon driving along I-70, I-29, first of all, from Omaha to Kansas City, and then I-70, once I got in Kansas City, where anyone who's driven along I-70, you can look down and see Royal Stadium at the time, and it was quite a sight for me. And I was like, whoa, okay, here I am. And yeah, pretty exciting time.
And then yeah, you had your first game. Uh, you went 1 for 2 with the triple. That I'll let you tell the story why it was a triple, um, instead of a home run.
Yeah, it was I think it was the last game of the season in Kansas City. And it was a meaningless game for both teams. We were playing the A's, and the A's had Mike Heath, who was normally a catcher. He was playing right field. And I think it was my second or third at bat. I hit a line drive to right field, and Mike Heath came running in on it, and it sailed over his head. And so it was an easy triple. And the third base coach, who I believe was Chuck Hiller, I believe, or Mike for anyway, waved me around to stretch it into an inside the park home run, of which I did not make it. Mickey Tettleton had the ball in plenty of time, and I tried to run him down, but he held onto the ball. And so it was a triple in my first at bat. I think there've only been, I was on a podcast a few months ago, and they looked up, and I think there've only been two other players in the history of game who had in the history of baseball who had an inside the park home run in the first at bat. So I almost entered that category, but it didn't happen.
So okay, so you did that. Then 83, they wound up sending you back to AAA, mostly because they were afraid that they didn't want you sitting on the bench. They wanted you to be getting at bats.
Yeah.
So is that frustrating? What's the mindset when you're needing to
Well,
go back and you've had that taste of the majors?
yeah, I think any athlete who wants to stay stuck in frustration will quickly realize that, what, this is not helping me perform. Sports is very competitive, always has been. It's probably more competitive now than ever before. And so, I think I just accepted it and went and said, okay, going to continue to improve. And it wasn't as good a year for me, but it was enough to get me called back to the big leagues in September. Um, so and then 84, I think I made the team out of spring training and spent most of the year up there.
Yeah, you split about half. I think you started 84 there, and then that was again. They were like, "We want you to get more at bats, go back down,"
Yeah.
and then brought you back up. I think at first it was there were a lot of injuries to like UL Washington
Yeah.
and Onyx Concepcion, and
And
even
Frank White.
Frank White.
Yeah.
You wound up. It was actually you wound up playing second a lot there.
I played a lot of second base that year, yeah, because Frank had some injuries and I enjoyed playing. Second was pretty easy for me to play. I always say playing second base is like half a day off for me. Just it's much easier.
And then well, so then that year the Royals made the playoffs. Um, played against the Tigers, who won the AL East and then wound up winning the World Series. You got in a couple of games there. So what's the World Series experience? You've got two of them here, but let's talk about the first time.
Well, the playoffs, the two playoff appearances, right? In 84, when we played the Tigers, the best of three, and we got swept. I think I got in game one. I think it was ninth extra innings, I believe, and the score was tied. And I was, walking to the plate, but it was, we were playing in Kansas City, so it was the bottom. If we had scored, we would have won the game. And so I get to hit, and I thought about, wow, this is a situation that every kid dreams about, hitting a home run to win a game and win a big playoff game. So and that entered my mind. I ended up, striking out against, I think it was Aurelio Lopez, big right-handed pitcher who I believe that's who it was, who was kind of my type of guy, like Dave Stewart, who just, threw hard and wasn't going to try and trick you. So those guys for me were pretty easy to face, but I ended up striking out. But yeah, so getting in the playoffs, getting our feet wet in 84 against the Tigers, who were a really great team that year. And then in 85, we got to the playoffs again against Toronto. Am I skipping ahead too far here?
Well, yeah, let's because a lot of things happened in the 85 season. So let's
Yeah.
let's cover
Okay.
85 all because that's the first year that you uh, made the team out of spring training, and that was your first full season
Yep.
in the majors.
Yep.
Um, because I believe it was did they trade UL Washington or did he sign as a free agent? He left, so then it was you and Onyx
Right.
at short. Uh, yeah, what up until we'll get to Letterman in August, so maybe up until about August, what's that season like for you? What do you
Yeah.
remember?
Dick kind of going in and out, back and forth with myself and Onyx. Neither one of us was hitting much. We both caught the ball okay. Um, so it was just, kind of in and out of the lineup, not being able to really figure it out, what it was going to take for me to perform, my best, kind of lead into zone motion later, but to perform at a high level on a consistent basis, so I was just, inconsistent. But, later on in the season, I think it was about 13 games to go, Dick put me into at shortstop and kept me there the rest of the way. And I caught the ball well and ended up playing, the entire postseason, which was really a special time in my life.
And um, who do I want to talk? 85 was also Brett Saberhagen won the Cy Young Award. What's it like playing behind a Cy Young winner?
He was amazing. I felt like I could cheat a little bit. If he was going fastball away, I felt like I could cheat up the middle against a right-hand hitter. And I found myself making plays that I might not have ordinarily made, or making them easier than they ordinarily would have been, all because of his ability to, hit his spots, on a regular basis. But Sabes was great, good fastball, great fastball command for a kid who was 19 or 20 at the time. And, had a really good breaking ball and a great changeup. He could really pitch and competitive as all get out as well. But what a joy playing behind him.
And then
All our
August,
guys, we had great pitching. I mean, all our guys we had a great starting staff.
Oh yeah, you mentioned Vita Blue earlier, and that you got to play with Vita Blue. Um, so we'll go backwards a little bit again. Just because you had mentioned going and watching him from the stands, what's it like when you get into a game and what you saw on the field as a fan is now you're on the field with that?
Yeah, so my first experience with that was when I was 19 in spring training when I was a starting shortstop and George Brett was the third baseman. And it was before the first inning, right? Getting ready for the first pitch. And George yells over to me. He says, "Hey, you got all the pop-ups back here." And I said, "No, wait a second, man. You're George Brett. You got it." And he said, "No." He says, "I'm serious. I don't like catching pop-ups behind third base." He said, "These are yours." I'm like, "Okay, I got you covered." So that was, my first experience of playing with, a guy who had already had a lot of success at the major league level. And then, being on the field in spring training, playing against Pete Rose and Gary Carter and Dave Parker and those types of guys. Um, Reggie Jackson, when we played, not in spring training, played against Reggie, during the season. Um, all those, really big names and big personalities and Don Baylor, I remember Don Baylor, he'd be at first base and he'd point at me like he was going to upend me at shortstop. Um, so, and Vita, playing with Vita, who was just, really one of the nicest guys I played with. It was wonderful. I got to play with Nolan Ryan. Um, yeah, so, you just, I oftentimes in my life, I'll find myself in a meeting with some, with what I do now, I'll find myself in a meeting with some really, names and powerful people. And just like I did in baseball, I'll say, well, am I supposed to be here? And I'll just say, well, obviously so I am. And that's kind of how I took it when I was starting to play against those guys. Like, okay, yeah, I'm here for a reason. I wouldn't be here if people didn't think I could be here or belong here. So it's kind of how I looked at it.
Well, and so you were kind of hey, do you belong here? But that wound up being kind of the subject of a joke that David Letterman's writers came up with in '85. Uh, Royals are doing well, but the Babe Ruth. Why am I saying Babe? Pete Rose
Yeah.
was chasing down Ty Cobb's hit record at the time,
Yeah.
and David Letterman goes on. Do you want to summarize the joke, or
Yeah, I could pick it up. Sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
go ahead
Yeah.
and talk about what happened and how you found out about it and when
Yeah.
you
So
first heard it?
it was in sometime in August. We were playing in Chicago against the White Sox, and I got a call in my room, and it was a sports writer. I don't know who it was from somewhere, and wanted to know what I thought about David Letterman's, joke last night or praying, whatever, his gig. And I didn't know about it, so he told me about it. But it was when Rose was chasing Cobb's hit record. Letterman decided that to kind of mention that there's a young player also chasing Cobb, and it's or chasing Rose, chasing Cobb, and it was me. And at the time, I had like 50 major league hits, and he had this blue hit counter that he would bring out. Now I don't know how often they did it, maybe a couple of times a week. And he'd say, "Let's go to the scoreboard and see how Pete and Buddy did tonight." And he had a picture of Pete and a picture of me on the hit counter and the number of hits we each had. And Pete, Pete had over 4,000. I had like 50. And he'd say, "All right, let's." Oh, Pete had two hits, and he'd hit the hit counter, and then and Buddy had a hit. So it's just kind of a joke, um, And then they called my mother. Very funny story is they called my mother and wanted to get a quote from her. Hey, Letterman's poking fun at your son. What do you think? And she said, my mother was very very naive, great woman, and she innocently said, "Well, if it were a higher rated show, I'd be a little offended, but." So Letterman actually loved that. And I said, and I told Letterman, I said, "Well, I think she caught it on a bad night," and he said, "Well, it could have been one of many bad nights." So, that whole thing was, kind of it was a fun thing, and um, but you know,
Well, but that is why I told you my friend who doesn't is not a baseball fan.
yeah,
That's why he knows you. That's why, you know, that's why I I wanted to write your biography for SABR was I'm a Gen Xer. Most of my sense of humor was shaped by staying up late when I could over the summers and watching Letterman. And so, you know, the fact that for my generation, Buddy Biancalana is always like, oh, all right, I remember that.
Uh-huh.
Um, so what kind of effect did it have? When did you start to notice in the crowds when you would go to play? What kind of reaction
Yeah.
were you getting?
Yeah, no, I heard, after that, I heard it, wherever we traveled, I heard a lot about it. People would yell something from the stands about Letterman or Letterman's favorite, whatever it was. I can't remember what they would say, but it was very evident that a lot of people were watching Letterman, not just you, Jake. Um, and I would get asked about it, someone asked me, about Letterman. I said, well, I'm closer to Rose than he is to Carson, People Letterman love that quote, So that's when Carson was kind of the leading late night entertainer, who actually owned the Letterman show, by the way. But yeah, just fun time and time of getting some publicity where my bat wasn't always getting it for me. So it was good. It was interesting though that I realized there were plenty of people that kind of just knew me from being on Letterman that really didn't even know I played baseball, kind of, and they were just more Letterman fans than baseball fans. So
So then the rest of the year, you guys we make you win the AL West again. As you said, you wound up being the Hauser put you in as the regular shortstop because you were playing better defense, basically. You wasn't getting much pop from either of your bats, but you were the better defensive choice. Um, what's that down the stretch? Because I think it was like a one game. I think you clinched maybe like with 2 games to go, something like that.
yeah.
So what's the chase like with the Angels on your heels?
Mm. Pretty intense. A pennant race is really something, it's just, you're watching that scoreboard every night and it's you go into the ballpark and you just feel the buzz. When you're in a pennant race, I mean, there's quite a buzz around the ballpark. You can just kind of feel pressure mounting. Um, and it can be difficult to sleep at times. Um, it's and the Angels were really good. They had a great club. Doug DeCinces, Bobby Grich, Reggie Jackson was on that team. Bob Boone as well, I believe. Um, so it was pretty intense. We had a huge series against them that went our way, and we ended up winning the AL West at the time. So pretty exciting time.
And then you're in the playoffs against the Blue Jays. So and I think that was a 7 game series, was it? Was it 6 or 7?
Yeah, it
I
was
think it
the
went
first
7.
year of a 7 game series in the championship rounds in the American League and NL championship series. So thank God because we were down 3 games to 1. Had it been a best of 5, we would have lost. But we were down 3 games to 1 and came back and won 3 games, the last 2 in Toronto to win the American League championship series, and that was really cool. It's growing up as a kid, you never, we can talk about this later a little bit, but I never thought about playing in a World Series. It was like too big an event. Just I knew I wanted to play Major League Baseball, and I just never could fathom playing in a World Series. And all of a sudden, there it is. So it was great. It was really fun playing in Toronto. They had great fans. Played at their old stadium, Exhibition Stadium, which was a football stadium, and it was cold. And but I loved the city. It was great to play in Toronto. Always a fun place to travel to. Good people.
Do you remember any particular moments from that series that stand out or
Hmm. I
no,
remember
it's okay.
I remember my wife at the time who traveled with me was at the hotel room before game 6 or 7, and some balloons showed up at the hotel room from some woman who I have no idea who they were from. And she called the clubhouse and got me on the phone and airing me out for some woman sending me balloons that I had no idea who they were, and I had to go out and play game 6 or 7. I can't remember which game it was, but that stands out. Um, what also stands out was playing shortstop at Exhibition Stadium. They had this little hump in the turf right in front of where you want to play at shortstop. So I had to kind of play in front of it, which was a little uncomfortable for me. But no, it was probably when we broke the game open in game 7. I think I had a pretty big hit, and then Jim Sundberg had a big hit, and or he had the hit before me. But just really amazing and celebrating. In Toronto at the hotel that night after winning it was really special. And then flying back to Kansas City the next day, and the reception at the airport, was really amazing. So very exciting time.
And so then you're in the World Series. That, like we said, this is your first full season in the majors, and you're going to the World Series. Um, what's your initial reaction? And you could talk a little bit about the nervousness of and that led you down the zone motion
Yeah.
path. But yeah, what's it like when you do realize this is the World Series?
Yeah. So it really hit me 20 minutes before game time of game 1. I was sitting in my locker here in Kansas City, and I was doing okay. And then all of a sudden, I had to be on the field in 20 minutes for introductions. And it just hit me like, whoa, because I'd never fathomed playing a World Series when I was a kid, or even when I got to the big leagues. It was like, I just kind of accepted that it was too big an event. It was something that at the end of the year, I'd go home and watched on TV. But all of a sudden, it hit me sitting in my locker, and I just got blindsided by this wave of fear to the point where I felt like I couldn't catch a ground ball if someone had rolled it to me. And it was the first time in my life that I just sat there and I said, "Wow, this is really scary." And usually before a game, I get nervous before a game, and one of the things I would do is I'd go make myself a sandwich, or I'd go to the Gatorade cooler, and just to distract myself instead of like really being with that discomfort. And so it was the first time I said that to myself. This is really scary, and the fear, just subsided enough to where I was comfortable that I could stand up and grab my bat, my helmet, my glove, and wait for my name to be introduced. And I did. And what happened next was I went out and played, 7 of the best baseball games of my whole life at any level. I hit whatever it was, 78 points higher than my career average, something like that, and played airless at shortstop. And I choose my words carefully when I say that every single ball hit me just right in the sweet spot of my glove, and every throw came out of my hand just with perfect speed and trajectory. And it was a feeling of, almost of not being able to do anything wrong, even if I tried. And there's one specific play that I like to mention as an example of how I felt was I think it was game 5 in St. Louis, or maybe even 4, but Ozzie Smith was stealing second base, and the ball kicked away from our second baseman, Frank White, into shallow left center field. And I hustled after it, and I, just barehanded, wheeled back and threw to second just to keep Ozzie there. And it was an easy play. I mean, anybody could make the play, and they're not a person in the stadium would think, "Oh, what a great play!" No, no, no. It's like it's no big deal. But I had this experience that I felt like I could have kicked on the ball there. And I don't know if you ever kicked a baseball. It's not like kicking a soccer ball, But I felt like there was this force that had kind of overtaken me, which I call the zone, which we now teach the zone. But I felt this energy that I never felt before as an athlete. That I felt like I could do, anything. And in every big situation during that series, I wanted the ball to be hit to me, as opposed to being hit to my teammates. Not that I didn't trust George Brett or Frank White or Steve Balboni in the infield. I did, but I knew for sure that I was going to make the play, and I wanted to make the play. I wanted the pressure on me. And it was a really, really great experience that I had happen to me that kind of led to what I've done later in life.
The fact that you were playing against uh, the Cardinals, and Ozzie Smith is the other shortstop who at the time is pretty much widely regarded as the best shortstop in the game. And that you're the star shortstop of the series. Did that hit you at that time, or is that something that it took you some retrospection to kind of realize, like, oh wait, I outplayed the best guy in the game at my position?
I mean, it's kind of a neat thing. Like I hear you saying that, and that's kind of, nice to hear, right? I didn't look at it at the time. I was just there trying to help my team win a game and help our city experience a world championship, right? And our management and of the fans of Kansas City. So I didn't view it in that regard then. But it's kind of cool. I get it. And the media, in game one of the World Series, I didn't do too much wrong in that series, except I missed the suicide squeeze in my first at bat on a John Tudor fastball, a two-seam fastball that ran away from me that I didn't even know he threw. And I just wasn't in a good position to get the bunt down. And Darryl Motley got tagged out between third and home. And, the media just really jumped on the fact that I missed the suicide squeeze. And it just kind of goes to show what an advantage the Cardinals have at shortstop with Ozzie Smith, versus me at shortstop, with the Royals. But that's where everything just kind of turned around after that. What was interesting was after that at bat, I ended up striking out on that at bat. But I recall walking back to the dugout with the feeling of like, something feels different in me right now. That I felt like I saw that ball better. I saw it for a longer period of time. It was like bigger. And it's like, I just didn't think much of it, but I recall having that thought. Um, and what was interesting was I went on again to play the best baseball of my career.
So yeah, you wound up winning the World Series. Saberhagen was the MVP, but you were number two. Um, and so from there on, between that and your Letterman recognition, uh, you were in high demand for what was that off season like?
Yeah, it was amazing. You don't realize how powerful, media exposure is. And, my phone was like ringing just a ton with all kinds of opportunities and autograph signings and parades and Letterman and Today Show and Esquire magazine and People magazine, all kinds of stuff, right? Commercials and hired a guy who went to my high school, was older than me, worked for Advantage International, a marketing company, and they represented a lot of tennis players. Became my, kind of my PR agent type, and got me some nice opportunities. But at the time, Jake, I wasn't really into all that stuff. I remember telling my wife at the time, when I realized, oh my gosh, all these people want a piece of me. They want me to do stuff. And I said, I'm really not interested in any of this. It just wasn't, it's not what I'm about. And not that there's anything wrong with it. Um, and she said, this is like a once in a lifetime opportunity. Like, yeah, okay, I'll go do it. So I went and did a lot of stuff. Um, and it was fun. It was a good time. I mean, going and being on Letterman and whatever, People magazine did a really cheesy story on me, and I modeled for Esquire magazine, and I was on the Today Show and met Doug Flutie and Mark Gastineau and Bryant Gumbel. So really cool guys that I look up to a little bit, um but yeah, just really just a neat part of my life.
And then in that off season, the Royals sent you. You talked to Letterman about your. Well, you know what? Let's talk about your Letterman appearance specifically, just because after he was joking around about you, making fun of you, what was it like? What was your? Were there butterflies in your stomach that you were going to go confront him? Were you worried about it? What were the producers doing to prepare you for it? What was the experience like being on Letterman?
Yeah, no one prepared me for it. They told me when I was going to go on. There was a woman on before me, who trained turtles, I believe, was what she did. Letterman actually came in the waiting room and introduced himself just briefly. And but no, I really wasn't nervous because I just come off 7 games in the World Series, which was, a bit nerve-wracking at times. So, going to being on a TV show was not that big a deal for me. Um, so, it was very interesting. He really kept control of it. They really keep control of the conversation. It's very interesting. Um, and he played a video. He said, let's watch some highlights of you in the World Series. I'm thinking, great. It's going to show up these diving plays, a bunch of base hits, that kind of stuff, scoring runs. And he all of a sudden the music to Carly Simon's "Nobody Does It Better" starts up, and in slow motion he shows me walking like 4 or 5 times to the song "Nobody Does It Better." So it was very funny. I gave him a bat, that I'd had an autographed bat with no. I said, and actually, you see there are no ball marks. I used it half the season, so I was poking some fun at myself, and I took it all in good stride.
Okay, so then you mentioned during that he asked you about getting a contract for the next year. You said you were waiting to find out. You got a significant raise. Um, the Royals knew that you were a star, but then they wound up bringing in Angel Salazar.
Yeah.
And so, what was, I guess, when they brought Salazar in, what was your reaction to that? And then what was the '86 season like for you?
Yeah, well, it was very interesting. So I had this really incredible experience in '85. Not just I played well, but from a mental perspective, just the freedom that I felt with everything slowing down. I wasn't thinking. Everything was just very fluid and effortless and great timing and just easy. And it allowed me to play so well. We win the World Series, and I'm kind of all the opportunities and the recognized name around the world, um, and yet I had no idea what took place in my brain that allowed me to play so well. And so the subsequent anxiety that I felt going back to spring training to try and play as well as I was capable, as well as I played the World Series, without understanding, what happened in my brain and body that allowed my full ability to rise to the surface. And a lot of people thought that maybe I played over my head. And what I now know, what I know now is no, I didn't play over my head. I was just able to access my full ability just by chance, which we now teach. I'm sure we'll get into that. But so I felt a lot of pressure, a lot of anxiety to live up to quote the hype, to this newfound stardom that I experienced, and it was very very challenging. Um, and I would have made it through, but they did go out and get Salazar, and he ended up playing and playing great. And I played quite a bit. In '86, but I was never quite the same player that I was in the World Series.
And then is '87 when your son was born? When
'87, yeah, he was born in
okay.
February of '87.
So yeah, so '87 now you're going into spring training. He was born like right before you had to report to spring training. So now you're a dad
Hmm.
and you're going in and competing. What's what's the '87 mentality? Is there more stress on you? Is
I
there
was I was the I was a starting shortstop.
Oh, actually, wait, I'm sorry. '87 wasn't that also the off season where they didn't offer you a contract or they didn't offer you arbitration, right?
Yeah, there was
You remember
that's when
anything
they were
about that?
colluding, right? That's during the collusion era. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
can you go into that?
they didn't offer me a contract, but said they wanted to sign me back and they'd give me a small raise. But as I, spoke to other clubs, no other club showed interest, for a lot of players. So the owners were colluding to keep salaries down, of which they got caught doing it, and they paid us down the road, settled it. But yeah, so that was '87. I was the starting shortstop, and I made an error on opening day against the White Sox, kind of a tricky little play at shortstop that I botched. Ended up costing us the game. So it was really tough making an error on opening day, and then I played a few more games and hit a home run and was playing okay, and then um, Billy Gardner was the manager then, and he sat me and started playing. I think he started playing Salazar again. I can't remember, Salazar, but and Salazar was really catching the ball well. So I sat on the bench for, she's long time without getting off the bench. And it was very depressing for me, really tough time in my life. And my confidence was really at an all-time low. from that experience. I just didn't know how to get through it. Um, and eventually got designated for assignment, went to AAA, and was traded to the Astros July 21st of 87. They were in the pennant race, and they had a left-handed hitting shortstop in Craig Reynolds, and they wanted my right-handed bat. I was switching at the time, but they wanted me to platoon with him from the right side. But I had a lot of one thing we haven't talked about. I had a lot of concussions as a child that was really playing a part in how I felt. That I've really healed over the years, but it made things very challenging for me emotionally and how I would respond to challenging moments in life back in those days.
And so yeah, you spent well, I think it was like 15 games or so. Actually, I got it here. 18 games in for with the Astros. You only had one hit before they wound up sending you down to Tucson. Um, at that point, you made it through the rest of the season. You off season you signed with the Braves to go to spring training, but wound up back with the Royals. At what point did it start to like what at what point did you start to realize like maybe the baseball career has run its
Yeah,
course? Were you still thinking this is just one tweak away or
yeah. Well, I'd had back trouble my entire since high school,
okay.
and the back started to really get bad in um, at the end of '87. I believe 87 or 80, yeah, 88. I was playing AAA. I was with the Braves in spring training. They had two young players, Jeff Blauser and Ron Gant. They wanted to send me to AAA, but I knew that I wouldn't play because of those guys. Those guys were in AAA at the time. And so I asked Bobby Cox, who was the general manager for the Braves, I said, can I go back to the Royals? And Bobby was great. He actually guaranteed my minor league salary and got me back to the Royals. And I went to AAA and had I had a pretty good year. I was getting my confidence back. Loved playing there. We had great guys on that team. And then in the offseason in '89, I was definitely more confident, although my back wasn't great. The Tigers wanted to sign me, and Sherholtz, so the Royals wanted to sign me back as well. So ended up signing back with the Royals. And my back, John asked me how my back was. It felt like it was going to be okay. But like 4 days into spring training, my back just blew out, and that was the end of my career. It was, I spent the entire year on the disabled list, and doctors wouldn't release me to play, and that was it.
And so what did you how did you transition to civilian life? What I know you did some post game
Yep.
for the Royals.
I spent I
What were
spent
you
some
doing
years.
in '89?
Yeah, in '89 when I was at the disabled list.
'89, you were on the disabled list for like the
Yeah,
whole season. So what were you
yeah.
doing?
I got my commercial. I got my real estate license and worked in commercial real estate. And then in '90 and '91, I did some pre and post game show on the weekends, along with working in commercial real estate. Really didn't know what I wanted to do. I just wasn't feeling good. My body, my back, between my back and previous concussions, I wasn't feeling good at all. And leaving baseball, it was a challenging time for me. Um, And so I was, rehabbing, got my real estate license and just trying to figure out, trying to make a living doing, figuring it all out. And then I was off the field for 11. I got in the agent business. I had a guy when I was in real estate. I cold called a guy in Columbus, Ohio, and he recognized my name and wanted to talk baseball, and I wanted to talk real estate, and one thing led to another, and he was working for a really big time um, agency in New York called NS Beanstalk, and they represented the nation's top broadcasters, including Walter Cronkite and Dan Rather and Diane Sawyer and Maria Shriver, big names. And they wanted to go into the representation of athletes. And this gentleman, Mike Schiff was his name, was going to head up the sports division. And so he brought me on, and then he ended up stepping out, and I stayed on with Barry Rona, who was, I don't know if you know that name, but Barry Rona used to represent the major league owners. And
Oh,
yeah, and he kind of switched sides and started representing players, and the Major League Baseball Players Union didn't like that. And So that made life difficult for me. But I spent several years in the agent business, um, and then eventually got back on the field. I was off the field for 11 years. I got back on the field and started coaching with Tampa Bay as an infield instructor, and became an infield coordinator there, and then I managed for about 5 years in the minor leagues. 2 years were in independent ball. Um, so I really needed to get away from the game for a while, and then got back on the field, and um, that was yeah.
Okay. And so what you're doing now, where the seeds of it were kind of in 1985, and trying to understand what was happening there. But where, I guess, walk me through what's the timeline of how zone motion, quantifying the zone, understanding the zone,
Yeah.
where were you able to actually start making stride rather than just being curious what it was, actually doing something with it?
Yeah, good question. So through the healing of my body, I started to learn a lot about the brain and brain-body connection. And when I got just prior to getting back on the field, I started to work with some baseball hitters. And I had met a guy, and I want to say it was like 2003. I'd met a gentleman by the name of Stephen Yellen, who was a tennis champion, who had figured some things out about the brain-body connection. And I started using a lot of his work in conjunction with what I was doing with athletes, and was really blown away by what I was seeing in working with some amateur hitters, and then started working with some professional players and had amazing results with both hitters and pitchers. Um, and then started doing research, started doing studies. We started studying brainwave patterns, and realized that what I was doing was increasing the theta brainwave state, increasing serotonin and oxytocin, two feel-good chemicals. Along with the players that I was working with, they were not just doing better, but they were in a better mood. In fact, it was a couple of San Francisco Giants pitchers' wives with whom I was working. Not the wives, I was working with the pitchers, their husbands, and the wives said to me, our husbands are in a better mood. And I said, well, they're pitching better. That would only make sense. And they said, well, no, it's independent of that. They're just in a better mood. I'm like, that's interesting. And I thought back to the research project that was done with a neuroscientist, Dr. Fred Travis, where we measured brainwave patterns. And one of the things we saw through the zone motion training process was an increase in the theta brainwave state. And again, theta increases serotonin and oxytocin. And so I thought back to that. I'm like, whoa, okay, so this is why they're feeling better, is because of the theta brainwave state, which is a byproduct of the zone motion training, which was really cool because everything we do in life we do for one reason, is we want to feel good. There's no exception. And so it turns out when we make feeling good our priority, we're better able to access our full ability as an athlete, not just an athlete, but in all areas of life. But that was really profound. And then I just started doing a lot more research and studies, did a big study at the American Sports Medicine Institute with Dr. Glenn Fleisig. The American Sports Medicine Institute was the institute owned by Dr. Andrews, who was at the time the go-to orthopedic surgeon for Tommy John surgery. And so it was a very, very successful study that we did there, where we saw an increase in performance, a reduction in fatigue in the pitchers, more fluidity of motion, less shoulder discomfort, less elbow discomfort. It was very profound and very successful study that we did there. And that led to other research. I'll let you jump in here.
Well, I was going to say, what, maybe just give me like the elevator pitch of what exactly the training that you're doing is. What is the brain body connection,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, sure. Been able to quantify what happens in the brain when an athlete's playing their best. And, if you ask 100 athletes in any sport how they felt when they're playing their best, they'll typically describe it in three ways: that things slowed down, they weren't thinking, their emotion was more fluid and effortless with better timing or excellent timing. And so if that's what's taking place when you're playing your best, it would only make sense to make it the priority. So that's what we do. We work with athletes on these certain brain processes that we teach. that give this experience that really start to shift the neural pathways, the neuromuscular connections, and they become 100% sure that it must be their priority. And then we just help them continue to strengthen and maintain those neural pathways so that they're then able to access their full ability and work with the emotional body as well. The emotions will undermine brain functioning. The brain is the operating system of the muscles. It's the operating system of our whole life. And if it's not the priority, to some degree, we're just kind of rolling the dice. So we make that the priority in the training. And it's not that other things are not important, because they are. But when the brain's in the proper state, a lot of nice things happen.
So from everything that you've learned, what happened to you in 1985 World Series?
Yeah.
Now
So
that now you can look back on it.
yeah, it's a brilliant, brilliant question. Information was just moving through my brain in a way that allowed all my muscles to fire in a synchronistic, harmonious, sequential manner, right? And so the motion, when an athlete is working on their motion, it gets stored in the middle of the brain, basal ganglia. And the whole key is to access, we call it the library of preparation, access that library and allow that information to move to the back of the brain, part of the motor system called the cerebellum. And the cerebellum allows all those muscles to fire in a synchronistic manner. The bigger muscles, we want them to play a supporting role. We don't want them to be more dominant than what they're designed to be. We want the subtle muscles, the ones that are responsible when that ball is really coming out of the hand well. Our hitter is able to make a last split second adjustment on a ball that cuts in or tails away. He's able to make that last split second adjustment and square the ball up. So it's all how information moves through the brain and how it affects the muscles.
So, and you've been doing this, so for how long? About
18 years.
18
18
years. I was
years.
gonna say about 15. Okay. Um, I don't know. Anything else you want? Any other good stories you want to tell me about it? Or
No, but it's been a
so
long haul. It's very, very interesting that
you've got, well, and you've got the book coming out. Do you want to talk about what's in the new
yeah.
book?
Yeah, a new book called Zone Motion, Your Unfair Advantage. It's probably 4 months away or so from being,
Okay.
the manuscript is done. Very excited about it. It addresses performance development and the injury epidemic in baseball, pitching injury epidemic. We've had great success at keeping pitchers free of injuries because of how information moves through the brain in a way that allows all the muscles to fire again synchronistically, right? There's less tug of war taking place with ligaments and tendons and muscles and fascia. So again, yeah, that's about 4 or 5 months away, and very excited about that.
Um, what other stories do you want to tell me? I'm gonna just start peppering you with like, who are some of the other opponents that maybe some of the guys that you mentioned, if you got stories, or other guys that we haven't talked about. Who are some of the toughest opponents that you faced?
Yeah, so let's see.
Stands out.
I typically get asked who are the toughest pitchers I faced, and the first one is Bert Blyleven. Bert Blyleven, who's now in the Hall of Fame, I believe. Um, Bert had a curveball that you could actually hear, and I've heard other people say the same thing, but it was such a tightly rotating fastball, fast rotation that you could actually hear it. And he had a good heavy fastball that he threw. He didn't command his fastball as well as he could have, but he was very tough. Jack Morris with his split finger fastball was very challenging for me. Roger Clemens, was tough. I faced him in his rookie year. So those are some of the better pitchers that I faced, that gave me and a lot of hitters trouble. Right, it wasn't just me, but a lot of people ask my experience with George Brett. The one story about George I told already about, that I had all the pop-ups. And another story was, I think it was my first major league start in Kansas City that day we talked about. And it was a fairly warm day. And, I was a little nervous, and I was hitting the Gatorade pretty hard. And about the second inning, it was a meaningless game. And George wasn't playing. About the second inning, I came in, and George said, "Buddy, how's the Gatorade?" And I noticed it tastes a little funny. Well, he spiked the Gatorade with vodka. I'm like thinking, really? Anyway, So that's another George Brett story.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I had the
Well,
opportunity to play. What's that?
I was going to say, well, no, go ahead I was going to ask about the Don Sutton story since uh, that's from before we started recording, but go ahead and finish your thought.
Yeah, playing. I was on the disabled list all year that Bo Jackson was with our club, and but watching Bo play on a nightly basis was amazing. I'll never forget in infield practice where he threw me a ball from right field, and I was a shortstop, and I was catching it was offline, so I was going to relay to third, and it was like catching a shot put. It was the most amazing thing that I've ever felt as an athlete. Where that when that ball hit my glove, it was like really like a 10-pound shot put, and incredible power.
Wow.
That and an experience, another experience I had that was similar was I was taking a throw at second base um, on a steal attempt by Ricky Henderson. And as an infielder, when you're taking the throw, you kind of know you're going to get the guy or you're not going to get him, right? You kind of know. Well, I've taken this throw and I knew we had Ricky, except Ricky had like another gear, and I felt this power just like explode the last 3 or 4 feet into the bag that was really, similar to the power I felt on that throw by Bo Jackson. Really amazing.
Yeah, we were talking about pitchers that you faced before we started recording. Don Sutton, Hall of Famer that you hit a home run off of. One of your home runs came off Sutton, but there was more story to it than that.
Yeah, it was on Game of the Week, and he was going for his 300th win. We were playing in Anaheim Saturday afternoon, and I think I did a home run the night before off Ron Romanek, or maybe it was the next day off on Ron Romanek. So I don't know, I think I hit 2 or 3 home runs in my career in Anaheim State Angel Stadium, whatever it's called. Yeah.
And then you talked about playing with Dave Stewart, and I was telling you, Dave Stewart was yeah, you had a double and a home run off of him. Batted like three. Well, actually, do I have it here? 364 off of Dave Stewart. So
Okay, don't hold on. Don't name how many bats I had though.
right, no, no, no. I was just gonna say 364. If you had faced Dave Stewart your entire career, you'd be a Hall of Famer.
Yeah. It's amazing. He had so many hits off him, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Home runs, doubles. Yeah, 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 yeah. 11 at bats.
Right.
I'll bail you out. 11 at bats.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, with Dave, again, he was one of those pitchers that would just challenge you. As I mentioned before, hard thrower, very competitive. Um, was able to hit a home run off. I think my first home run, major league home run, was off him in Texas.
I think that's right. Yeah. I was looking it up before. Yeah. Um, what about do you have any umpire stories? Any umpires that I don't know that you got along with, that you didn't get along with, that
Well, everybody, loved Steve Palermo. God bless him. He's since passed. Very unfortunate story. He was trying to break up a robbery and ended up getting shot and some paralysis in his legs. Um, no real stories of major league umpires. I know that when I started managing in professional baseball in the minor leagues, that umpires brought out a side of me that I never knew existed. That's the truth. They brought out anger in me that I never knew existed when when someone says that there's no chance that they missed a call, I have a real problem with that because there's always a chance that they missed a call. And so those umpires, when I'd question their call, I'd say, is there a chance you missed it? And they'd say, no, there's no chance. If they just said, you know what, I think I got it right, but there's always a chance I missed a call, I would say, okay, thanks, man, you're human, I get it. But when they would say no chance, I had a real problem with that. And I would sometimes there'd be calls at first base where I knew that if we were on the offense and I knew that first baseman pulled his foot and the first base umpire called him out, I would go out and I'd say, you know what, I think he pulled his foot. And he said, no, he kept it on the bag. And I said, are you sure? He said, yeah. I said, can we ask your partner? And they said, no, I got it. I said, well, if you're so sure that you got it, there's no downside in asking your partner, right? And they'd say, well, yeah, and I knew for sure he pulled his foot. And the home plate umpire would have a, better lane, a better sight of that, right? If he pulled his foot at first base. And I'd get that call turned around, quite, several times. And I think that it really didn't like me for that. So I didn't get along well with the umpires when I managed for that very reason.
You talked about John Sherholtz calling you when you're right before you got drafted. What kind of relationship did you have with him, or just, the executives with the Royals throughout your career?
Yeah, good. It was really great with John. I think, he took a special liking to me because I think he put his name on the line, when he drafted me first. Um, he got to know my parents well, and there was a lot of, they all got along well, liked each other. Um, John had a great family, great wife, and his kids. His young boy Jonathan, who I believe is still in baseball as an executive for the Braves. I'm not sure, but Jonathan kind of liked me as a player, and so there was a lot of it was just kind of a special connection I felt with John. And he over the years, John has been a real supporter of what I do with Zone Motion. In fact, wrote a really positive letter to Major League Baseball regarding a study we wanted to do with Major League Baseball. But yeah, John's always just been kind of had a special place for me as a player. Wrote me a really nice letter when I was forced to retire from my back injury, and he's got a special place in my heart.
Uh, you talked a little bit about playing in Toronto with that hump in the turf. Um, you played at Royal Stadium. What are some of the other stadiums that what were your favorite stadiums to play in? Your least favorite? Anything? I mean, you can talk about Candlestick Park. You finally got the chance when you were with the Astros. One thing that came out of that was getting to play at Candlestick.
Yeah, so let's see. So I grew up going to games at Candlestick, right? And certainly wore my park-in blanket every time I went, and but never played there until I did in August or September with the Astros. I couldn't believe how cold and windy it was. The fog would roll in over the top of the stadium, first base side of the stadium, and it was kind of like playing in Cleveland in April. The way, the wind whipping off of Lake Erie, you felt like you're getting hit with ice in the face. It was very similar in Candlestick, and that was in August and September, right? In the summer months. So if you're going to San Francisco, bring a jacket with you. But I love some of the stadiums I really enjoyed playing, and I loved Old Comiskey Park in Chicago, although the infield was really slow, but it's just a fun stadium. The White Sox in those days were pretty good in '83. I think they might have won in '83, if I'm not mistaken. Um, in infield, it was easy to play on that infield. It was just so slow, much like Detroit was such an easy infield to play on. Enjoyed playing in Anaheim. I always seemed to hit pretty well there. Enjoyed playing in Oakland, in front of friends and family. Um, you know, Back in those days, there were, not every infield was the same. So there was, as an infielder, if the infield was not good, it was you weren't happy.
Yeah.
So Milwaukee was tough, and Cleveland was tough, and even Boston was a little tough. Their infield wasn't great, but it was fun to play in Fenway. And no place like Yankee Stadium. Yankee Stadium is. I always said Yankee Stadium was like playing in another league. There was the major leagues, and there was Yankee Stadium. Quite a place.
I think I'm out of questions.
Okay.
Got anything else you need to tell me? Anything else you need the world to know?
No,
All
learn about
right.
zone motion. They need to learn about zone motion. It's
Good.
revolutionary. It's life changing. I'm not trying to promote here, but it is, and every athlete needs to learn about zone motion, all based on science.
All right. Um, Thanks for doing all this with me, sitting down and talking to me all this time. Getting back to me on the biography. It's been great.
Yeah, it's been nice. Great job. Appreciate
All
you.
right. Thank you.